Here's a rare opening that catches your opponents off guard, gives you a strong attacking setup, and avoids heavy theory. It looks quiet, but it's deadly. Let's break down the G3 Vienna game. White begins with the king's pawn forward, and black matches it. Next, white develops the queen's knight, and black mirrors with the same knight. Then comes the surprise. White plays pawn to G3, preparing to fianchetto the bishop and control the long diagonal. Black develops the king's knight, aiming to challenge the center quickly. White fianchettos the bishop to G2, and black places their light-squared bishop on C5, eyeing the F2 square. Now white plays an interesting move. The queen's knight jumps to the edge of the board, hitting the bishop. Black retreats the bishop to safety on B6, but white immediately captures it with the knight, forcing doubled pawns after the A-pawn recaptures. White plays pawn to C4, grabbing space and challenging the center. Black responds with pawn to D6, reinforcing control over E5. Now white places the king's knight on E2, keeping flexible plans open. This knight can swing to G3 or F4 later. Black develops the dark-squared bishop to E6, preparing to finish development and castle. White pushes the queenside pawn to B3, locking down the C4 pawn and preparing to develop the other bishop. Black castles kingside. Now white fianchettos the dark-squared bishop to B2, and black brings the queen to D7, preparing a common bishop sacrifice idea. White castles kingside, completing development. Black plays bishop to H3, threatening to trade off white's strong G2 bishop. White calmly plays pawn to F3, reinforcing the kingside. Black captures the bishop on G2, and white recaptures with the king. At first, it looks like white has a weakened king, but in reality, white has gained control of the G-file and has long-term attacking chances. The position is now rich with dynamic play, and white is just getting started. This next line is where the G3 Vienna gets wild. If black plays too passively, white launches an attack that ends in a queen sacrifice, and the engine gives white nearly a +2 advantage. Let's walk through this beautiful trap. White starts with the king's pawn forward, black matches it, and the knight comes out to the queen's side for both players. Then comes the G3 setup again, slow and flexible. White fianchettos the bishop, and black develops their light-squared bishop aggressively to C5. Now white plays the key move. The queen's knight jumps to the edge of the board, threatening the bishop. Instead of retreating the bishop to B6 like last time, black tucks it back to A7, a passive but logical-looking move. White calmly returns the knight to the center, and black castles kingside. Then white brings the king's knight to the board, followed by black reinforcing the center with a pawn to D6. White castles, and black brings out their dark-squared bishop, pinning potential pressure on the king's side. Now the fun begins. White pushes the H-pawn forward, hitting the bishop. Black retreats one square to H5. White follows up with the G-pawn push, challenging the bishop again. Black backs off to G6. White now strikes in the center with a D-pawn advance, and black captures. White recaptures with the knight, and when black trades knights, white brings the queen to the center with tempo. After the queen moves to D4 and black plays pawn to C5, the queen shifts back to D1, creating subtle threats. Black tries expanding on the queen's side with pawn to B5, and here's where the chaos starts. White pushes the G-pawn again, attacking the bishop. Black retreats to H5. Now white pushes one more time. The G-pawn takes on F6, sacrificing the pawn and opening the file. Black captures with the dark-squared bishop, and now the queen sacrifice comes in. White allows their queen to be captured, and instead of panicking, white takes over with the rook, placing it on the open D-file. Black tries to counter with a check on H4, but white doesn't care. White's knight swoops in, capturing the loose B5 pawn, and suddenly everything starts falling apart for black. White has full activity, open lines, and the engine says, "You're up nearly +2, despite being down a queen." This is one of the most fun and dangerous lines in the Vienna, perfect for catching unprepared opponents and unleashing chaos. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the line, be sure to try it in your own games, and I'll see you in the next one.